"You're never home anymore," Michelle's voice echoed in the otherwise quiet kitchen. Her words laced with a frustration I had long stopped noticing. I could tell she was upset, but the weight of my job, the pressure of the project I had been given, drowned out everything else. I glanced up from the blueprints spread out on the table in front of me. I hadn't even realized how late it was. I know. I'm sorry, Michelle. But you know how important this project is?" She sighed, running her fingers through her hair, the exhaustion evident in her posture. "It's always about the project, Jack. Always. And what about us? What about me?" Her words stung, though I wouldn't admit it. I didn't know how to respond. I had worked so hard to build the life we had, a beautiful home in the suburbs, 2 kids, the perfect family on the outside. But somewhere along the way, the connection between Michelle and me had worn thin, and I hadn't even seen it happening. She wasn't the ambitious journalist I had married. Once upon a time, she had dreams of writing, of making a name for herself. But after Matt and Lily came along, those dreams faded. She chose to stay home, raise the kids, and slowly, the person I had married seemed to vanish. I didn't blame her, but I also didn't know how to reconnect with the woman she had become. "Is there anything I can do?" I asked, my voice too tired to offer real comfort. Michelle shook her head, turning to face the window as if the answer to her problems lay out there in the darkening sky. "I don't know, Jack. Maybe there is. Maybe there isn't. I wanted to fix things, to reach out, but I didn't know how. I was too caught up in my career, too absorbed by deadlines and meetings to notice the cracks forming in our relationship." In the evenings, after the kids were in bed, Michelle and I barely spoke. We coexisted, like roommates rather than a married couple. Matt, our 16-year-old, was becoming increasingly distant, lashing out at both of us, while Lily, the 10-year-old, tried to keep the peace. But I wasn't paying attention. Not enough. I thought everything was fine. I thought my success would make up for the distance growing between us. How wrong I was. The opportunity of a lifetime had arrived, but it wasn't without its costs. The prestigious residential complex I had been assigned to design was everything I had worked for, my big break in the world of architecture. The project would elevate my career to heights I had always dreamed of. But with each passing day, it also took more of my time, my energy, and my focus. I found myself staying at the office later and later, making excuses to avoid the long, quiet nights at home. It wasn't that I didn't want to be there for Michelle and the kids. It was just that the project consumed me. The pressure was immense, and I convinced myself that all I needed was to push through, to finish the design and secure my place in the industry. But things at home weren't as simple. Michelle had begun spending more time with a colleague named Andrew, a writer she had met at a local coffee shop. They worked together occasionally, and as far as I knew, their interactions were strictly professional. Or so I had told myself. But I couldn't help but notice the changes in her behavior. She was coming home later than usual, her face flushed in a way that seemed unfamiliar. She would hurry past me, offering a distracted, "How was your day?" before retreating into the guest room or going straight to the kitchen to prepare dinner. I had chalked it up to her being busy with her own life, perhaps regaining some of the independence she had lost when she stayed home to raise the kids. But then one night I saw the text. I was scrolling through my phone absent-mindedly when Michelle's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. The name Andrew flashed on the screen, but it wasn't just a professional message. The words were warm, personal even, the tone intimate in a way I hadn't heard in years. My heart skipped a beat. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. I miss you." The message was innocent enough, but something inside me shifted. I stood frozen, staring at the screen, my mind racing. Was I overreacting? Could this just be a harmless friendship? But then, my gut told me otherwise. A few days later, Michelle was late again. The house was quiet when I returned. No sign of her. I didn't have to check her phone this time. I knew something was wrong. My thoughts raced, but I still wasn't prepared for what happened next. When she came home that night, her eyes avoided mine. She immediately began her usual routine, but I knew this time it was different. I couldn't let it go anymore. "Michelle," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "What's going on between you and Andrew?" She froze, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then she turned to face me, her expression unreadable. Jack, she began, her voice low, it's more than just a friendship. I didn't want you to know, but I've been seeing him for months now. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. What do you mean, seeing him? Michelle, you've been having an affair. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I'm so sorry, Jack. I never meant for this to happen. Anger, disbelief, and betrayal coursed through me. But beneath it all, there was something else, something I couldn't identify yet. This was the moment I had feared, but I hadn't truly believed it would come. I don't know what to say, I stammered, struggling to hold it together. Why? Why him? Michelle shook her head, her voice breaking. It's not that simple. I felt so alone, Jack. And when Andrew listened to me, really listened, I didn't know how to stop it. I wanted to yell, to demand answers, but instead, I found myself numb. There was nothing I could do in that moment. We both knew the damage had been done, but I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. I was determined to fix this, to save my family, or what was left of it. I couldn't sleep that night. The weight of Michelle's confession pressed down on me, suffocating any hope I had of finding peace. The thought of her with Andrew kept swirling in my mind, and despite the hurt, I knew I had to understand more. The question burned inside me. Was our entire marriage a lie? I tried to ignore it. I really did. But every time I looked at Matt, our 16-year-old son, the nagging doubt grew stronger. There had always been something about him that I couldn't quite place. The way he was so different from me. It wasn't just the way he looked, though that had crossed my mind more than once. It was how he reacted to things, how we couldn't quite connect. Michelle and I had never talked about it, but in my heart, I always wondered. I couldn't let it go. A week after Michelle's confession, I decided to take action. I knew it was a long shot, but I suggested to Matt that we take a DNA test together. I tried to make it sound casual, like it was some sort of fun science experiment. Hey, buddy, I'd said, trying to keep my tone light. How about we do one of those ancestry tests? Just for kicks. Matt had looked at me like I was crazy, but I pressed him. He was reluctant at first, but in the end he agreed. I wasn't prepared for what would come next. When the results arrived, I felt the air leave my lungs the moment I saw them. My heart raced as I read the words on the screen. You and Matt are not biologically related. I couldn't breathe. The room felt like it was closing in around me. The floor beneath my feet suddenly felt unstable. The truth that I had tried so hard to deny, hit me like a ton of bricks. Matt wasn't my son. I'd been raising someone else's child. All these years, every moment, every milestone was built on a lie. The test didn't tell me much more. It didn't say who Matt's real father was, but it didn't matter. I knew enough. I had to confront Michelle. The conversation was like a nightmare. When I demanded the truth, Michelle broke down, confessing everything in one rush of words. 17 years ago, when Matt was conceived, we had gone to a party together. She had gotten drunk, and in a moment of weakness, she had slept with someone else. A stranger. A mistake. At the time, Michelle had convinced herself it was a one-time lapse in judgment. But as the months went by, and as she saw Matt grow, it became something she couldn't take back. She had been too ashamed to tell me. I stood there, in the same kitchen where we'd shared so many meals, unable to process what I was hearing. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to lash out. But all I could do was stare at her, at the woman I had thought I knew. Michelle tried to justify it, her voice quivering. Jack, it was a mistake. It wasn't about you. It was a one-time thing, and I never meant for it to affect our family. But it had. It had changed everything. I had no idea what to do with this new reality. The foundations of my life, the life I had so carefully built, had crumbled in an instant. The worst part wasn't just that she had cheated, it was that I had been a fool. I had raised Matt, loved him as my own, and now I realized that all of it was based on a lie. I needed answers. I needed more than just her admission. But for the first time in our marriage, I knew there was no going back. The man I had been before that moment, the husband, the father, the architect of my perfect life, was gone. And in his place stood a man who had to figure out what to do with the ruins. I had always thought that a marriage could withstand anything. That love, loyalty, and commitment could overcome any obstacle. But in that moment, standing across from Michelle, all the promises I had made to her, all the years I had devoted to building this life with her, seemed meaningless. The air in the house felt colder, thicker. I was no longer sure of who I was or who she was. And what hurt the most was the realization that I could no longer trust her, not even with my heart. We didn't talk much after the bombshell of Matt's paternity. Michelle and I barely looked at each other. I threw myself into my work, diving deeper into my architecture project, hoping that if I just kept moving forward, I wouldn't have to face the truth. But the truth kept crashing into me at all hours of the day. A few weeks after the confrontation, Michelle dropped another bombshell. "I'm pregnant," she said one night, her voice almost a whisper. The words hit me like a slap. For a moment, I couldn't process what she was saying. She was pregnant with Andrew's child. Everything I had tried to hold together, everything I thought was salvageable, shattered. She was leaving me for him, and now she was having his baby. The very thought was too much to bear. I wanted to yell, to demand answers, to ask why she couldn't have at least fought for our family. But there was nothing left to say. She had made her choice, and I wasn't part of it. Divorce papers were filed shortly after that. It was a painful process, but I knew deep down it was the only way forward. I couldn't stay with a woman who had betrayed me not just once, but twice. The affair with Andrew was the final straw, and the pregnancy made it clear that there was no future for us. It wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the end of everything I had once believed about love, trust, and family. Matt's decision wasn't an easy one. He was angry, confused, and didn't know how to process the truth about his paternity. For all these years, he had believed I was his father, and now he was learning that I wasn't. Despite that, he decided to stay with Michelle. I didn't blame him. She was still his mother, even if she had made mistakes. I tried to be understanding, but the pain of losing him was unbearable. Lily, on the other hand, chose to stay with me. She was young, still trying to make sense of the world, but she could see through the lies. She didn't understand everything, but she understood that her mother had torn the family apart. In her eyes, I was the one who had always been there, the one who could be trusted. The custody battle was inevitable. Michelle fought hard for Matt, using every argument she could to make me look like an absentee father. She accused me of being too wrapped up in my career, of neglecting the kids. She tried to twist everything I had done to support the family into something that made me look selfish. But the court decided in my favor. I was awarded custody of Lily. I couldn't have been more relieved. At least I knew one of my kids would be with me, with the man who had raised her, loved her, and never betrayed her trust. Matt's decision to stay with Michelle was painful, but I respected it. He was still my son, even if the DNA test said otherwise. I would always be there for him, but the truth had changed things. I just didn't know how to move forward with him. The days following the court's decision were a blur of emotions. My life had been torn apart by betrayal, but now I had to navigate the chaos of legal proceedings and a broken family. I had won custody of Lily, but the victory felt hollow. What was the point of winning if it meant losing everything else? Michelle didn't take the court's decision well. She fought for every inch of control she could, trying to prove that I was unfit to raise Lily, that my demanding career made me a negligent father. The accusations stung, even though I knew they were just part of the game, a game she was willing to play dirty. She had to maintain the illusion that she was the better parent, the one who had always been there, the one who had sacrificed everything for the kids. But the truth was, she hadn't been there for a long time, and I wasn't about to let her rewrite history. I wasn't the perfect father. I knew that. My work had consumed me. I had allowed myself to get lost in the grind, neglecting the very people I had sworn to protect. But there was one thing I could stand by with certainty. I had always tried to provide a stable, safe home for my children, even when Michelle and I were drifting apart. Lily seemed to understand this in a way that Matt never could. She chose to stay with me, and I knew I had to make things right for her. I had to be the steady hand she needed, even if I wasn't sure how to fix the pieces of my own broken heart. Matt, on the other hand, was torn. The truth about his paternity weighed heavily on him, and he struggled to find his place. He still couldn't forgive me for what had happened, even though I had raised him as my own for all those years. There was a part of me that wanted to fight for him, to remind him that I was still his father in every sense that mattered. But I couldn't force him to see it. He had to come to terms with it in his own way, on his own time. I never stopped trying, though. Every chance I got, I reached out. We had awkward, strained conversations about nothing, about school, about his friends, about the weather. But I never gave up. I wasn't going to let him slip away. Not completely. As for Michelle, she and Andrew seemed to settle into their new life, although it was far from the picture-perfect world she had envisioned. Andrew, for all his charm and confidence, turned out to be less than ideal. He was selfish, irresponsible, and not the man Michelle had imagined him to be. She had left me for him, but now, as she dealt with the realities of life with him, she started to see the cracks in their relationship. She had traded stability for fleeting excitement, and it was costing her. Sometimes, when I spoke to her, I could hear the regret in her voice. But it was too late for us. The damage was done. The months following the divorce were filled with unexpected twists. I was slowly rebuilding my life, but the path was nothing like I had imagined. Everything had changed, and I was still trying to figure out who I was in this new reality. Lily became my anchor. She was only 10, but her strength and resilience amazed me. While her peers were absorbed in schoolyard dramas, she was facing a much harsher reality, the collapse of her family. But despite it all, she chose to stay with me. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I doubted myself, when I wondered if I could truly give her the stability she needed. But every day, Lily reminded me of why I had to keep going. Her laugh, her curiosity, her way of seeing the world. It was like a breath of fresh air in a life that had become suffocating. Matt, however, was a different story. Our relationship was still strained. I wanted to believe that we could rebuild what had been broken, that time would heal the wounds. But it wasn't that simple. He had his own way of dealing with things, and forgiveness wasn't something he was ready to give me. It wasn't just the paternity that divided us. Matt was angry at Michelle, at me, at the world. He felt betrayed by both of us. I tried to talk to him, tried to explain that nothing about his existence had changed for me. I had loved him as my own, and I would continue to do so. But he couldn't hear me. There were nights when I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if Matt would ever come around. Would he ever see me as his father again, even if I wasn't his biological one? It was the question that haunted me. Michelle, on the other hand, seemed to be unraveling. She was with Andrew, but their relationship was nothing like the fairy tale she had hoped for. The man she had left me for was flawed, selfish, and unable to provide the kind of stability she craved. I could see it when we spoke. The cracks were there, though she tried to hide them behind a veneer of confidence. But even through the tension, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The facade we had built together had fallen apart, and now we were both forced to face the truth. The truth about our marriage, our choices, and our future. As for me, I started to change in ways I hadn't anticipated. I couldn't go back to the man I was before, the work-obsessed architect, the man who put success above everything else. It felt empty, hollow. The projects I once poured myself into no longer held the same allure. Instead, I found solace in simpler things. I spent more time with Lily, focusing on her needs, her happiness. I learned how to cook dinner, something I had never bothered to do before. I took up reading again, something I had long neglected. The things that once felt like distractions became the things that grounded me. I wasn't living for accolades anymore. I was living for my family, for Lily, for a future that wasn't dictated by my past mistakes. I started seeing a therapist, something I had resisted for years. I wasn't ashamed to admit that I needed help. I had been carrying the weight of this betrayal for so long, and it had taken its toll. The guilt, the anger, the loneliness. I had to face it all one painful session at a time. Through therapy, I began to understand the root of my problems. I had let work consume me because I thought it would solve everything. But it hadn't. It had cost me my marriage, my relationship with my son, and my own happiness. Slowly, I started to rebuild, not just my relationship with Lily, but with myself. I wasn't perfect. I made mistakes, but I was trying. I was learning to be present, to listen, to let go of the illusions that had kept me locked in a cycle of self-doubt. And through it all, Lily was my constant. She had trusted me, even when I didn't trust myself. She had chosen to stay with me, and in doing so, she had shown me that there was still hope. Hope for change, hope for healing, and hope for a future where truth, no matter how painful, would lead to a better life. Time had a strange way of shifting perspective. A year had passed since the divorce, and though the pain of the past lingered, it had dulled to a manageable ache, a reminder of how far I had come and how much I had lost. Life wasn't perfect, and I no longer had the illusion that it could be. But that was okay. I had learned that growth, though painful, was a form of rebirth. Lily and I had created a new rhythm. Our days were simple: school, homework, dinner, and quiet nights spent reading or watching movies. She wasn't the little girl I had once carried in my arms, but she was still my little girl, and that was all that mattered. In her I found strength. She had this quiet wisdom about her, an understanding of life that most adults couldn't grasp. She never asked for much, but the few times she did, I made sure I was there for her. Matt, on the other hand, remained distant. Though we had occasional conversations, the relationship we once shared was no longer the same. I understood why he needed space. I had shattered his sense of identity, and that wasn't something you could simply fix with a few apologies. But I refused to give up on him. I would be there when he was ready, even if it took years. As for Michelle, I had come to accept that she had made her choices. She had moved in with Andrew, and though I suspected she was beginning to realize her mistake, it was too late. Her new life, built on the ashes of our marriage, wasn't what she had imagined. She had traded one kind of emptiness for another, and though I felt a twinge of sympathy for her, I knew I could never go back to that life. One evening, after a long day at work, I found myself sitting in the small park across from our home. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the trees, and the air had a coolness to it that made me think of fall. Lily was at a sleepover, and for the first time in ages, I had a moment to myself. I sat there, breathing in the quiet, and realized something. The man I was now was different from the man I had been a year ago. And for the first time, I felt at peace with that. I didn't need to be the perfect father, the perfect architect, or the perfect man. What mattered now was that I was trying to be better, trying to do right by my children, and trying to let go of the past. I looked down at my phone, glancing at a message from Matt. It was a short text, nothing profound, just a question about a school project. But for me, it was a small victory. It was an olive branch, a sign that maybe, just maybe, he was starting to heal. I replied, typing out a simple response. "I'll help when you need it. Don't hesitate to ask." I sent it and put my phone down, gazing at the sunset. It wasn't the closure I had expected. It wasn't some grand moment of reconciliation, but it was a beginning. I had come to understand that life wasn't about getting everything right. It was about learning from your mistakes, facing the consequences, and finding new paths forward. I couldn't change the past, but I could shape my future. And in that moment, I knew that whatever the future held, I would face it with my eyes wide open, with a heart unburdened by lies and a soul ready to move forward. And so, life went on. A new chapter, a new beginning, and the chance to redefine what family, love, and happiness meant to me.